I'm Emily Rowney.
And I'm Alicia Holland.
This is Bill Camp, the voice of Forensic Files 2 on HLN, and you're listening to Murder in the Rain.
In our last episode, Alicia, you talked a little bit about how up until this year, Oregon and Louisiana juries could convict non-unanimously on serious crimes. For my episode today, I thought I'd stay in a similar vein. I'm guessing most people don't know this, but Washington just had a pretty big anniversary. It was the second anniversary of the abolishment of capital punishment, aka the death penalty. On October 11th, 2018, the death penalty was declared unconstitutional in State versus Gregory due to being classified as arbitrary and racially biased. But what's interesting is it was found to be unconstitutional twice before this. It was originally abolished in 1913, reinstated 6 years later, and then abolished again in 1975 and reinstated later that year due to a citizen vote. Whether you're a supporter of the death penalty or opposed to it, doesn't really matter. I'm not really here for that today. But you know what I am always here for? Fun facts you probably didn't need to know. Okay, Alicia, you ready for some capital punishment facts Washington State edition?
Ooh, can't wait.
Do you think there'll be a Jeopardy category this year?
Oh, I hope so.
All right, so capital punishment in Washington required a unanimous vote. If one or more jury members voted against it, it results in a life sentence with no retrial. Only 5 people have been executed in the state of Washington since the death penalty was reformed in 1976. Basically, the Supreme Court modified it to make sure there were detailed procedures for when it was imposed. There are roughly 80 documented executions since 1904. 100% of them were men. And of the documented executions, the governor with the most executions during his time in office was Clarence D. Martin, who served from 1933 to 1941. He was a Democrat who was born and died in Cheney, Washington at the age of 69.
Nice.
The number of executions during that time was 18. I think second place was about 13 in their office, which was held a fewer years. Prior to 1998, all executions were done by hanging. Once lethal injection became an option, death row inmates got to pick their poison and choose whether they would die by hanging or injection.
What would you choose?
Injection.
Yep.
Now, only 3 people had that choice given to them. They all chose it. So there have been 3 executions in Washington using lethal injection. Now, that was just a little bit of trivia to kick this off. You're probably going to learn a bit more throughout this case, or these cases, I should say.
Ugh, what are you, me?
Because today we're going to talk about 3 cases, those 3 cases that resulted in lethal injection, capital punishment deaths in Washington State. I would like to remind listeners that our show is listed as explicit for a reason, not just our naughty language in the bloopers. This is adult content and it's incredibly dark and violent. And in today's episode, I will be describing rape, torture, and violence against women and children. On November 19th, 1995, police arrived at the home of Findlay, Washington resident Melissa Sarbacher after a 911 call from her neighbor. What police were greeted with was a bloody scene straight out of a horror movie. Outside the residence, they found a woman sprawled on the ground with a gunshot wound in her chest. As they moved inside, they found another woman with multiple gunshot wounds in the living room. Further into the house, the shocking discovery of a young boy in the master bedroom was made. His naked body was sprawled on the bed, partially covered with a towel. Inside the nearby bathroom, they found wet toys, remnants of water, and speckles of blood in the bathtub. Thankfully, a sole survivor was located in one of the smaller rooms. A young girl was found standing in her crib, but unfortunately she was unable to tell anyone of the devastation she witnessed, as she was only 2 years old. The victims were later identified as homeowner 21-year-old Melissa Sarbacher, her 3-year-old son Kevin Sarbacher, and her 26-year-old friend Lisa Vera Acevedo. While the bodies were taken by the medical examiner for autopsy, authorities began deciphering what happened that night. Police started by interviewing people close to the Sarbacher family and seeking out Melissa's missing vehicle, a black Ranger truck. After speaking with Melissa's friend Karina Bartnett, who had seen her at least twice that evening, police had a lead on a 25-year-old man named Jeremy Sagastegui. She said he had been at the Sarbacher house babysitting the two children, Kevin, who was 3 years old, and Tiana, who was just 2 years old. Another woman, Karen Southam, the cousin of Lisa Vera Acevedo, called to tell police that she had information on the vehicle they were looking for, that black Ranger truck that belonged to Melissa, a truck she had seen parked outside of an apartment building where Sagastegui lived with a roommate. On November 20th, the day after the murders, detectives arrested Sagastegui and searched his home. He was very compliant. In fact, he told police he would tell them everything and even pointed them to a set of keys belonging to Sarbacher's home and vehicle, his bloody clothes, and a rifle hidden beneath his couch. Thanks to his desire to divulge every gruesome detail of what he did to the Sarbacher family, police were able to record his omissions and put together a clear image of that night. It appeared they were lucky to not only have a confession, but ample evidence and witness testimony to bring to court. The state decided to proceed with 3 first-degree murder charges against Sagastegui, and they were seeking the death penalty. On January 30th, 1996, he pleaded guilty to all 3 charges. In fact, he didn't appear to want to fight at all. He even wanted to represent himself in court. Not long after this, he stopped taking medications, which included hypertension meds and antidepressants, and he was noted to be acting very strange in jail. This resulted in the judge wanting to ensure that he was actually fit for trial. She refused his guilty plea until he could undergo a medical examination that would ultimately allow him to be determined mentally competent for trial, as well as to represent himself. After his 15-day evaluation at the Eastern State Hospital, he was deemed good to go, and his previous confession was upheld and could proceed into evidence. In court, not only did Sagastegui tell the jury that he committed the crimes, he said he liked it and that he should get the death penalty for what he did, and that he would not be offering them any mitigating circumstances during trial as they might expect from a normal defense team. He then went on to help narrate the events that transpired that fateful night with the help of the recording of his confession and his own testimony in court. On the night of November 18th, 1995, Melissa wanted to go out with her friend Lisa, and since she had 2 small children, she asked a friend to babysit them. It should have been a straightforward night. The kids went to bed early and they would sleep through the night, so Sagastegui agreed to watch them when she asked him. At some point that night, Kevin woke up and began screaming for his mother. Unable to calm him down, Sagastegui grew angry and turned to violence. He placed a pillow over Kevin's head and yelled at him repeatedly to shut up. As his violence and anger grew to a peak, he raped and stabbed the 3-year-old Kevin before bringing him to the bathroom, where he then held him underwater to ensure that he was dead. After killing Kevin, Sagastegui took a rifle from Melissa's bedroom, one she used for protection, and waited for her. He planned to kill her. He was going to sit and wait for her to walk in and shoot her right there on the spot with her own weapon. He then described to the court how he did just that. The women came home, and when they opened the door, he didn't hesitate to fire shots at both of them. Lisa was hit right as she walked through the door, and it caused her to fall backwards outside the house. The medical examiner confirmed that Lisa had died from a single gunshot to her chest. However, Melissa had been shot twice, once in her chest and once in her neck, which ended up traveling up through her brain. Sagastegui described that he asked both women how it felt as they were dying, and described how Melissa had terror in her eyes as he believed she realized that he had been there alone with her children and must be wondering what he had done to them. After admitting to what he did, he told the court that Melissa was the worst mother in the world and that her son was going to grow up to be a molester and a murderer because he had clear signs of being molested, and he was just a bad kid. He knew what he did was wrong, but he didn't have any remorse. He said that he enjoyed killing them and claimed that he hadn't started the violence with an intent to rape Kevin. That just happened. That at first he wasn't even aroused, but eventually became so, likely due to the escalating violence that resulted from his anger. Needless to say, he was found guilty, unanimously, and he was sentenced to death. A quote from the High Court said, "If there was ever a case that justified imposition of the death penalty, this is it." He then joined the 15 men already on death row to await his execution, a day that would be set for 2 years in the future. Sagastegui's mother, Katie Vargas, fought for her son's life, and while she did so, the death penalty was on a stay. She fought for him even when he asked her not to. He said he didn't want to appeal, yet she was desperate to save the life of her child. The Ninth Circuit Court approved that her evidence that her son was sexually abused as a child and suffered from mental illness was in fact enough to warrant her another hearing. Yet Governor Gary Locke and the U.S. Supreme Court proceeded with the lifting of the stay because they said they felt he was mentally competent and the state had the right to execute him. Mere hours after that stay of execution was lifted, they proceeded with the death penalty for Jeremy Sagastegui. This was October 13th, 1998. He would become the first person to die by lethal injection in Washington state, a choice he decided on over death by hanging. At 27 years old, he lay strapped to a table and silently accepted his lethal injection. He glanced to the onlookers before looking away, and he offered no final words. However, those that sat in during his trial likely remember the haunting words he left everyone with. I got a thrill out of the killing. It gave me a great sense of power. I liked it. I'd like to do it again. Don't you get it? I killed. I loved it. I want to do some more. And because, let's be honest, most of us are interested, his final meal was pizza, fries, corn, jellied fruit salad, ice cream, and an eclair.
Corn
I love
and
corn.
jellied fruit salad.
All right. Now, I like a nice ambrosia salad. I'm not going to lie. But I recently started eating corn with that, was that tahine?
Yeah.
Oh, it's life-changing.
But as a final meal?
Yeah, I don't know what I'd choose. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it is.
James Homer Elledge was by no means a nice guy. In 1956, and at the tender age of 10 years old, he was living in a juvenile detention center for the crime of breaking and entering. Within 2 years, he did it again and once again found himself at a similar facility. There wasn't really anyone at home that was going to help him through these challenging times. His father was suffering from mental illness and his mother was an alcoholic. The challenges at home, paired with the death of one of his sisters, forced him into a downward spiral, and he started abusing alcohol as a 10-year-old child. In his teens, 2 of his brothers committed suicide, and shortly after that, he went out into the world on his own at the age of 15. Needless to say, when he wasn't hospitalized for mental illness, he was taking up residence in jail. At 22 years old, he robbed a Western Union office in New Mexico. And that's not all. When he left, he took not just money, but a young woman by the name of Linda Sue Gullion. He raped her, hit her in the head with the butt of his gun, knocking her unconscious, and poured gasoline all over her in an attempt to kill her. After pouring the gasoline, he had returned to his car, maybe to get a lighter, but while he was away, the girl ran for her life and flagged down a truck and was able to narrowly escape with her life. Once caught, he was sentenced to 10 to 15 years for kidnapping and only ended up serving 7.5. And the best part is that actually included extra time for escaping prison. So he's doing time for kidnapping, escapes prison, gains an additional 2 to 10 years, but only serves 7.5. And in 1972, he ended up making parole and moving to Seattle, Washington to start a new life. In 1974, Elledge was living in the El Dorado Motel, and a disagreement broke out between him and Bertha Lush, his elderly landlady. I'm thinking she was confronting him about paying the rent, but the argument soon turned from a typical disagreement to a violent episode when Elledge beat her to death with a ball-peen hammer, hitting her a total of 28 times. He ended up fleeing the scene and was apprehended days later in a stolen car in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Police found out that he had an open warrant for the murder in Washington, so he gets toted back to the West and earns a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole. He then remains in prison till about 1989, so that's roughly 15 years. He gets out on parole, but within months he ends up back in prison due to his old habit of burglary. After an additional 5 years, he makes parole again and manages to stay out of trouble. Nearly a decade later, Elledge would once again find himself at the center of a very violent crime. In 1998, James Elledge was 55 years old and working as a janitor at the Lighthouse Methodist Church in Linwood, Washington. On the night of April 18th, Elledge invites a 47-year-old woman named Eloise Fitzner for a night out, suggesting that he'll not only buy her dinner but also one of her friends. Now, the interesting thing about Eloise is that Elledge and her had been neighbors, and during that time they formed some kind of romantic relationship. But it sounds like it wasn't serious, and he was actually cheating on his girlfriend, who later became his wife. Eloise and her friend agree to meet him, and I'm not sure if this is under the pretense of friendship or forgiveness, or maybe they were going to rekindle their romance, but for whatever reason, she and her friend agree, and they arrange to meet him at the church so that he could give them a tour before they go out for the evening. When the women arrived, they started the tour and were introduced to the pastor of the church. After a short, polite exchange, the pastor leaves, and Elledge continues his tour by bringing the women to a Bible study room. Once inside, Elledge turns and closes the door behind them. As he turns back to the women, he has a knife. He explains to Fitzner that he is angry about what went down in their relationship the year prior. Apparently, she had written a letter to his girlfriend telling her that he had been cheating on her and that he never really loved her. So maybe Eloise didn't know that he had found out about that letter until that moment, but she was also unaware that Elledge had prepared for this moment. Earlier that day, he had gone to the local Fred Meyer where he purchased nylon rope and he hid it in room 102, the Bible study room. So when he had that knife pulled on them, he slowly reached over, grabbed the rope, and started to bind the woman's wrists and ankles together. Once the women were tied, Elledge covered the friend's face with a sweatshirt, set a Bible next to her, claiming it was for her safety. Elledge then takes Fitzner across the room, placing duct tape across her mouth. Her friend could hear the struggles and pleas from her the entire time. The violence escalated, and Elledge quickly put the knife at her neck. He stabbed her in the neck before strangling her with his bare hands. The medical examiner noted that she would have died from either injury, and there was no way to know which one she ultimately died from. But he was sure that she was alive when she had been stabbed. After hiding her body under some clothing, blankets, and boxes, Elledge took the friend in her vehicle and drove to his trailer in Everett, Washington. While she was kept against her will in his home, he had raped her. The next day, in a very odd turn of events, he let her go. He told her if she contacted police, he would find her. And of course, she did contact police, and they started the hunt for him. Within 3 days, police discovered Fitzner's abandoned car in Tacoma. They didn't have to look much further because Elledge called police himself to tell them he was hiding in a Tacoma hotel room. In April of 1998, Elledge was charged with 1 count of aggravated murder. The court entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf, but within a month, the state filed to seek the death penalty, and Elledge entered a guilty plea. In his plea, he admitted to harming both victims and committing premeditated murder. Elledge requested that his lawyer not present any argument or evidence that might sway the jury to take pity on him and give him life instead of execution. He even said that, quote, "There is a very wicked part of me, and this wicked part of me needs to die." The jury felt that his crime was premeditated, cold, and calculated, and paired with his long history of crime and violence, they agreed with the prosecution's choice to seek the death penalty. When considering if he did in fact deserve the death penalty for his crimes, 4 considerations were discussed and ultimately helped them come to an agreement. 1, the nature of his crime. 2, the aggravating circumstances, or kidnapping. 3, the defendant's criminal history, the fact that he has killed before. And 4, the defendant's personal history. Now, that one's a little iffy for me because of his past issues with alcohol and mental illness. I would assume that would work in his favor, but for the jury, this was in support of capital punishment. The Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty spokesperson Neil Holkauer tirelessly fought for Elledge behind the scenes as well as in the media. He suggested that he was mentally ill and that should have been considered fully in his sentencing. He suggested that he had been a model prisoner since he was arrested and even found religion and a deep remorse for his actions. But Elledge didn't want to file an appeal. He wanted to let it go and accept his fate by opting to die by lethal injection. On the day of his scheduled execution, Elledge requested a final meal of scrambled eggs, bacon, hash browns, waffles, a sweet roll, cereal, milk, and orange juice. But he didn't end up eating any of it. He refused his meal altogether. Lawyers were on standby in case he changed his mind and wanted to file an appeal, but he didn't. Outside the prison, there were over 100 people, some protesting the execution, others there in support of it. I honestly think most people just assumed there was going to be more action. People were aware of the stay in Sagastegui's case and that it was released up until the last minute, so they were shocked to find out that this execution went as smoothly as possible with no one fighting it. Elledge didn't speak any final words to onlookers at his execution. He didn't even turn his eyes to the audience of 12, which included 2 of the detectives that discovered the body of his victim and the prosecutors in the case. He declined to eat. He declined to talk. He even declined a sedative before he was strapped to the gurney. And his final wish was that his decline for an autopsy be upheld. Elledge died at 58 years old on Tuesday, August 28, 2001. He did write final words. His words indicated that he had found God and believed that he had been forgiven for what he did to those innocent victims. He wrote, "I leave those who survive me in the comfort of knowing that I died in this faith and have now joined my Lord in eternal glory." Cal Coburn Brown had a history of assaulting women. As a teen, he had a number of run-ins with the law, including a very serious offense at the age of 19 when Brown was arrested for a knife assault against a woman in a California shopping center. In 1984, when Brown was a freshman at Oregon State University in his mid-20s, he attacked a woman he had met through her babysitter who he was friends with. He arrived at the woman's house that she shared with her 2 young sons. Brown claimed that he had sprained his leg and he asked to rest at her home. She let him in and told him she would call a cab. As she turned to use the telephone, he swung a 42-inch leather thong around her neck to choke her. As he pulled to tighten the thong, she fell backwards and hit the floor, and he quickly climbed on top of her and began to strangle her. She was able to get out a scream, and by some amazing circumstance, a police officer in the neighborhood heard and was able to intervene and arrest Brown. With Brown was a backpack, presumably for school, but inside he had a roll of duct tape and a large knife. He served a 7.5-year sentence for this crime and was released on parole in 1991. The DA felt so strongly that he was a danger to society, one of the worst, in fact, that he wrote a letter to the parole officer to tell him that he was, quote, a potential mutilator and killer of women. 2 months into his parole, Brown proved the DA's letter correct. He had enrolled once again as a student at Oregon State University and regularly checked in with his parole officer. However, on May 23rd, the parole officer was not able to locate Brown after he was gone for some time. He requested that the police issue a warrant for his arrest. What he didn't realize is that Brown had left town and he was up in Washington near the airport. That evening, he carjacked a 21-year-old woman named Holly Washa by knife point in a hotel parking lot near the SeaTac airport. Initially, he got into the passenger seat and forced the woman to drive while he held a knife against her, but he decided to have her pull over so he could tie her up in the passenger seat, and he drove Washa to the Shadow Motel where he rented a room after he stopped to purchase handcuffs. In his room, he forced Washa to undress, and then he commenced an evening of rape and eventually torture. Brown tied Washa to a bed, forcing her legs to be spread, and gagged her with ripped-up clothing. He raped her repeatedly. Brown would only stop his abuse on Washa when he was hungry. He would then have her get dressed, and they'd go to a local drive-thru to get something to eat before returning to the motel where he could return to his onslaught of abuse. He also took a break to take her to her apartment where he instructed her to steal checks from her roommate so that he could forge them. Now, something did not go right with that. I don't know if they couldn't get the signatures right or what, but it added fuel to the fire. He took her back to the motel where her nightmare could grow even more unbearable. Brown shaved her pubic hair and began raping her again, this time with foreign objects. For 2 days, she lay there helpless, enduring his rage. He held Washa against her will for a total of 34 hours, and then, when he finally had enough of her, He put her in the trunk of her own car, slashed her throat 3 times, and stabbed her in the chest and stomach. Originally, he had parked at the Doug Fox parking lot, but when Wash's blood began dripping out of the trunk onto the ground, he opted to move the car to another airport lot where it would likely go unnoticed a little bit longer. And then he entered the airport and boarded a plane to Palm Springs. A few days prior to the murder of Washa, Brown had been traveling, thus why his parole officer couldn't find him. During his travels, he met a woman named Susan Schnell on a flight to Seattle. They had a casual conversation during the flight and ended up exchanging phone numbers as he intrigued her. What about him was intriguing, you ask? Well, he told her he was a fancy home designer and spoke to her in an Australian accent, even though he's not Australian. So basically, he stood out to her despite his looks, because he is not pretty, I'll tell you that. Anyway, they exchanged numbers and he ends up calling a few days later when she has a layover in Seattle. So they meet for dinner and make plans to spend Memorial Day together in Palm Springs. So fast forward a few days later, he's killed Washa and now he's on his way to Palm Springs where she intends to meet him. Brown and Schnell meet at the Ontario, California airport on May 25th, where she picks him up in her red Corvette. They drive to a local Ramada Inn where they intended to have separate rooms. However, they arrived, the hotel had a mix-up, so they ended up having to share a room that night. They spent the night, and the next day they embarked on a tour of Palm Springs, cruising around in her sports car. Throughout the day, they got close, and witnesses even noted that at dinner they were seen kissing and clearly in some sort of romantic arrangement. Once they return to their room, Brown performs oral sex on Schnell, and then he has her lay on her stomach so he can give her a back rub. Now, this is where things turn violent. He quickly jerks her arms back and tells her not to scream. Understandably, she does scream, so he slits her throat. She doesn't die, though. He handcuffs her and places sanitary napkins on her neck to halt the bleeding. He explains to her,
It's summertime and I'm ready to rest, relax, and catch some rays.
well, don't forget your sunscreen.
Of course I won't. I also won't forget my Kefla Organics CBD.
Good plan. Kefla Organics is one of my favorite ways to relax and enjoy the benefits of CBD, whether I'm at home with a tea reading some true crime or laying at the beach on my day off.
Kefla Organics is a fair trade, vegan, refined sugar-free CBD company. And at KeflaOrganics.com, you'll find chocolate bars, hot cocoa, chai lattes, and more, making the taking of CBD a lot more enjoyable than a regular tincture.
And Murder in the Rain listeners can get 20% off using the promo code RAIN20.
So follow at Enjoy Kefla on social media and visit KeflaOrganics.com. Use the code RAIN20 at checkout to save 20% while enjoying guilt-free, stress-reducing, sleep-assisting, delicious Kefla Organic CBD products.
That he just wants her money, but ultimately, like Washa, he ends up shaving her pubic hair and rapes her. Eventually, her bleeding becomes more significant, so he suggests that he leave to go pick up medical supplies so that she doesn't bleed out. While he's away doing that, Schnell is able to make her way over to the phone and calls the front desk, who then calls police. Schnell ended up surviving the entire ordeal and was able to give police information so that they could locate and arrest Brown. In custody, he admits quickly to attacking Schnell, but not only that, he tells them about what he did to Washa a few days prior. Police in Palm Springs reach out to Seattle police to let them know where they could find the body of Washa. In fact, he still had her keys on him that he was able to show police to prove that he was telling the truth. 5 days after her death, police discovered her body in the trunk of her own 1985 Oldsmobile. She was wearing a bloody jacket and her purse strap was wound tightly around her neck inside the giant gash in her throat. On November 26, 1991, Brown admitted guilt and was sentenced to life imprisonment in California for the first-degree aggravated mayhem, torture, robbery, and false imprisonment of Susan Schnell. Then it was Washington's turn. In December of 1993, court proceedings against Coburn Brown began. Susan Schnell was able to testify in trial in Washington despite arguing from Brown and his lawyers. Her testimony was allowed as it helped paint the entire picture of what Washa endured, as their experiences were so similar. The events in California were indeed an extension of the crime spree that initiated in Washington. Brown tried everything. He claimed that double jeopardy was in play based on being prosecuted in California first. I don't know if he was trying to make an argument that they were all related, but that was squashed. Then he says he wasn't adequately read his Miranda rights when he was initially arrested in Palm Springs, but that was all recorded, so they had that proof that he was. By January, he was found guilty and got to learn of his fate. In the penalty phase of the trial, the jury was told that Brown suffered from antisocial personality disorder, sexual sadism, and manic syndrome. However, they settled on the decision that his crimes of robbery, kidnapping, rape, torture, and murder did indeed constitute the death penalty, as the DA suggested. Unlike the men mentioned earlier in today's episode, Brown tried to fight against the death penalty verdict. He filed a claim that his attorney was ineffective and that there should have been a reevaluation of the death penalty in his case. The biggest reason for this was that the judge had removed 3 jurors, 2 of which were based on their view of the death penalty. One of them was being very transparent about her lack of support of it, calling it barbaric. They were ultimately dubbed substantially impaired for their points of views and removed from duty. Since Brown and his lawyers did not fight that at the time, he believes his lawyer was ineffective at his defense. This claim was not validated. The state did not believe he had an argument and that he was granted habeas relief when he was ultimately saying he hadn't. Brown also argued that his mental illness was never fully factored into his sentencing. He had a history of bipolar disorder, which was documented in court records, so it's safe to say it was considered. While he sat on death row, he filed for multiple stays of execution, 2 of which were granted, 5 were denied. Finally, after 16 and a half years on death row, vigorously fighting against capital punishment, Brown was scheduled to die by lethal injection on September 10th, 2010. On his final day, he took part in a final meal of pizza, apple pie, root beer, coffee, and milk. When secured in the execution room, Brown offered some robust final words to those that witnessed his execution. For 3 minutes, Brown took the time to outline the significant disparities between his sentence and other killers out there like Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer from our episode A Scale of Awfulness. He was serving life sentences for his 48 murders, while Brown was convicted of only 1. While he did not apologize for murdering Washa in his rape and attempted murder of Schnell, he did say he understood their family's hate for him and went on to say that he forgave their hatred and hoped that they would get closure from his death. And he ended it with, "Thank you, God bless my family." Cal Coburn Brown was the last person executed in Washington state, and when he died, there were 8 inmates awaiting a similar fate on death row. Since the abolishment of capital punishment in 2018, their sentences have been commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One of those lucky bastards is Robert Lee Yates Jr., who you can learn about in our episode Homeboy Wrote Camaro. I definitely plan to tell you the stories of the remaining 7 on future episodes.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Caitlin.
How are you?
Good. You know what I'm sick of?
What?
Ted Bundy.
Jeffrey Dahmer?
Gacy?
Other well-known serial killers?
No, for real, though. I'm tired of hearing about the same cases over and over and over.
Me fucking too.
That's why we created Luminol True Crime. We are a true crime, conspiracy theories,
Alien,
strange happenings
podcast.
We talk.
You listen. And then it ends.
So we are Luminol True Crime, and we are here for all of those cases that you actually haven't heard of yet, which there are surprisingly a lot of them.
Every week, we choose a new theme.
Check us out. We release episodes every Wednesday. They're full length, about an hour long each, and we talk about different cases you probably haven't heard of. We have a beer. We enjoy it, and it's a lot of fun. So we think that you'll really like it.
Yeah, join us.
And listen to Luminol True Crime.
Bye, kids.
Bye, Illuminati.
Hey, Alicia, have you given much thought to home security?
I mean, we do host a true crime podcast. It would be nice to have peace of mind, but it just seems like something that doesn't fit my lifestyle.
That's what I thought too, but then I found Simply Safe. So let's play a game. You tell me all of the reasons why you don't have a home security system, and I'll blow your mind with some reasons why SimpliSafe is a good option for you.
Yay, a game. Okay, number 1, cost. You know, I'm very thrifty, and home security just screams expensive.
SimpliSafe has tons of packages so everyone can stay safe on a budget. You can cover just your front door or get sensors on every window and cameras in every room. But for 24-hour coverage, it starts at just $15 a month.
Okay, well, paying some stranger to come set up a security system for me in my house during a pandemic doesn't really sound that appealing.
Honestly, I'm a little surprised you wouldn't welcome a guy in uniform into your house, but not to worry, it's totally DIY. I set up my own system in 20 minutes. But if for some reason you need help, they have someone you can call.
Okay, smarty. How about for those of us, as example, you and I, who are renters, we can't even paint a wall without permission. How do you expect us to install a huge security system into our homes without damage?
That was my biggest concern as well, since I'm a renter. But you don't have to put holes in your wall for SimpliSafe. All of their sensors use 3M strips so you don't damage the paint. Even if you move, you can take your system with you.
You do love a good command strip. Well, I guess that covers all of my concerns, but I'm sure there are other systems out there too. Why SimpliSafe?
Well, you mean besides the thousands of real customer reviews and myself telling you it's great? Well, U.S. News and World Report named it the best overall home security of 2020. Why not take a little bit of stress out of your very stressful life and invest in your own safety and security? Check out SimpliSafe today. Murder in the Rain listeners who sign up with SimpliSafe get a free HD camera. Dude, free stuff.
Okay. I'm going to check it out by going to simplysafe.com and using the promo code /rain, which is what you, dear listeners, should do to receive a free HD camera. That's simplysafe.com /rain.
What do you think? I know you have thoughts on capital punishment.
I have feelings about
I don't know how
everything.
in depth we want to go, but
Not too far.
I'm on the fence with it. Like I've said this to you before. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to kill some of these people, but I don't have a faith that our justice system isn't racist or works properly for everyone. So until that day comes, I could see why you'd be opposed to it. I just think some of these people are human garbage. Like that guy fighting, why would I get it? It's like, because he's tortured. You're top of that scale of awfulness.
I like to, imagine the chutzpah it takes to go, "Oh, I only killed one person. He killed like a bunch of people. Like, why isn't he getting death penalty too?"
It's interesting to see one man's comparing his murder to another man's. But you do look at, the doctors and their scale of evil.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm adamantly opposed to the death penalty. Every study has shown that it does not deter people from crime. It costs more money to house people that are on death row.
That it does.
There's no benefit whatsoever. There are too many cases where it was the wrong person, and there were petitions and there were people. There was a guy saying, I did it. There was family saying no, like, even the victim's family was like, no, this is not, don't do it. And they still did it. So, it's like prison in general to me, where it's like, it's not worth having all these people locked up if you have how many percentage of people that shouldn't be there.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fundamental problem, obviously. Yeah. I'm not going to disagree with you there. But.
And when you look at what these people are doing, that they end up on death penalty or on death row, they are not mentally sound, whether it's in that moment or it's a mental health issue.
Let's get into that. Let's not discuss whether the death penalty should be yay or nay. Let's talk about the mental health aspect. Right. Obviously you think if you can prove there's mental illness, then we should be eliminating that as an option in general.
Well, yeah, it shouldn't exist, and it certainly shouldn't exist for someone if it's like, oh, they have this, and this. But the thing is, you're never going to get the people that are actually doing it. So these people that you're saying that they're admitting to it or they're caught red-handed where it's absolutely them. But then they're being found to have, some sort of mental impairment. Mm-hmm. And so it's like the ones that are on death row that don't have the mental impairment, who knows whether or not they did it. But it's like you're sitting here and it's like, yes, it is the worst thing. And you did these horrific crimes that I would say unspeakable, but you're just speaking all up on them. And how, of course you want them eradicated from the earth, but you have to look at that to say their brain isn't working right. And that I think people take that as being an excuse or a free get out of jail card or a it doesn't matter as much or they didn't mean to. It
It's
was
just
an
a
accident.
different kind of imprisonment, I think.
It's just like your brain's not working the right way to be safe.
Now, I will say when this is legal, when they were doing capital punishment, there is a factor where you cannot have mental retardation.
Right.
So I think where people were really fighting it was like that should expand. It shouldn't just be because like have we ever heard of someone with mental retardation committing murder? I don't know if I know of one off the top of my head.
And definitely
Like
not
that
off the top of my head.
to me sounds like they didn't understand what that meant at the time. You know,
Mhm.
I think it's kind of an encompassing terminology.
Yes.
You know, really out of date terminology,
Mhm.
but that was a factor. So I think a lot of people were trying to fight with like, hey, my son was severely abused as a child and he has all these mental issues. We really should be considering another alternative. But when you have a governor who felt it was appropriate and a state that actually voted for it, I mean, what could you do? So it's been a long history for Washington, and Oregon still has it. We're on a stay for our governor
Yeah.
previously, but or actually both governors, but it's still there. You could easily flip the switch and go the other way. The other argument is why should we as taxpayers pay for these criminals
Mhm.
to continue to live their life in a comfortable manner?
Because it costs more money to have them on death row between appeals.
Actually,
and,
I just read an article that said that is not true and that it is no different than a regular prisoner. So
if it's no different,
yeah, but what I'm saying is if I could choose to eradicate pedophiles and murderers, I probably would. But I need
Yeah,
to
see,
know
I
it
couldn't-
happened and that there was appropriate evidence and they did get their
that's what I'm saying. I couldn't say yes to that, knowing that it would encompass the possibility of someone that doesn't. I'm
sure.
sorry.
No, and we have
Y'all
very
can-
different stances.
Y'all can
on
watch
it.
Dancer in the Dark and then talk to me about death penalty.
No, I totally agree with you. I think there's severe miscarriage of justice in many cases that show why we can't do that. However, if that were resolved, I'm all for it. I love it when I read a case that some parent killed some pedophile hurting their child. I'm like, yeah, I'd do it too.
I totally get it. And the vigilante. And if someone harmed my family, I'd be like, I'll do it myself. Lock me in a room with some nail
I understand
clippers
it.
and
We
I'll
have
take my
empathy.
time.
That's why we get it.
Yeah.
I hate knowing that somebody gets cable TV in prison after they murdered some family. Like it's bullshit. But I absolutely understand where you're coming from. We just have different points of view.
I'd just rather take the money that it costs to have someone on death row to put it into not necessarily treatment, but just maybe treatment and understanding
treatment
and talking to them and treating the mental health aspect.
There isn't enough of that. I do agree.
Exactly. And learn from that. And then we don't have to house them with cable and we don't have to house them with pizza and we don't have to house them with all these things that like whatever. Then you are able to learn from them and perhaps you can catch people that are at this other. So instead of a kid in juvie that probably shouldn't be there or, maybe if it is extreme, whatever, then they're in juvie. And instead of now having a school to prison pipeline, we can now take that and go, whoa, this kid is checking all these boxes that also follow all of our studies of all these guys that have done these really horrific things. Let's really put some effort into like focusing on him and getting treatment now. So it's like it could all feed itself and eradicate all the bullshit. Maybe.
So what I found interesting though about these three people, we've got one who fought it. He wants life in prison.
Right.
Then we've got two guys that are basically committing suicide by execution. They want it. They want to move. And it's like, is it because of regret? Is it because they know they're bad people? What do you think? Like,
I've heard multiple times, like in other, I'm sure anyone listening that, lives the true crime lifestyle, you frequently hear where it's like, I know Dahmer talked about that, where it's like, these guys that are saying I have this monster in me and I just want to quell it and I don't want to have to, like, it's this driving force outside of them. And so it's
or
like,
the little human part of them that wants to kill that monster.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's horrific because, you're like, you know what? Get rid of him. Doing that to that kid, like, that's my nephew's age. I don't have the words of what that would do to me. But then there is a weird feeling of sadness almost
for that little human part.
Yeah, to say I know that what I did was beyond horrific.
Well, that reminds me of like when we talked to Diane and she was saying how Tommy Lynn Sells, like part of her really heard that part of him.
Yeah,
that
what you
was
say, I
still
wish I could
human,
save the
that little boy.
Mhm.
Right. It's like had someone given him what he needed earlier, would it be a different outcome? And I always go back to that. It's like we talk about when we pitched our show, exploring that human aspect of these horrific crimes, and that does speak to me. But then it makes me think: is that one guy, Coburn Brown, is he the real devil because he's like, I want to live, like he's fighting it? Is he just full monster?
I definitely did not feel, not that I felt empathetic to the other guys, but almost.
Mhm.
Nothing with him where it's
Yeah,
like,
he's
gross,
just-
get out of here. But
And
those
it
other
is
guys,
like
it's
and it was so calculated. Like
Yeah.
he planned. And what I didn't talk about was when he met the woman on the plane and killed Washa. In between, there were two other women he tried to set up dates with. One of them thought he was ugly, and the other just fell through. So it's like he was planning this. He
Yeah.
just wanted to do as much as he could.
So and that's the thing. And I think that's I like when we have these conversations, especially when it's something that we have a different opinion on, because it is these difficult conversations is how problems can get solved and how ideas can come out. Because if I just sit here and go, I'm anti-death penalty, and you say I'm pro-death penalty, and we leave it at that, that's not what this is. It is so not black and white, and it is such a big picture and so many turning parts to where you're like, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard anyone do to a child. And 4 sentences later, wow, that's really heartbreaking to hear how desperate he wants to die because he can't control these feelings of hurting
And I
others.
think that's
like,
why
it's awful.
The death
across the
penalty has
board.
always been a really hard topic for me, because where I can totally empathize with someone who wants to kill someone because of the horrible things they did, I realize there are mitigating factors that make it impossible for me to fully agree with it, because I don't believe our justice system is working.
Yeah, at the very least, no one should feel confident in it because of
No,
that.
when anyone's life is at stake, you can't feel that confident. Like there are always going to be things you hear about a person that are going to appeal to that human side. So that's why it's like such a hard topic for me, because I can see the points of view.
I actually had a friend of mine who listens. Hi, Hans. He sent me an email after we had, we always make our joke about pedophiles, and by joke, half joke.
Not joke.
Not joke. No, and it was really interesting. We had a really interesting conversation of
God, is he pro or something?
No, just like that there are programs where it's like you can work to reform, where it's that driving thing, that thing that's in you, because you're talking
that sounds a lot like sending someone to a camp to not be a homosexual. That's how I feel.
No, because if you're looking at someone and it's like, oh, you were sexually assaulted as a child, and now like that's while your brain is chemically forming, and now you're older and now you have these tendencies, and it's like, could there be, again, this is not a conversation to start, but it's just kind of interesting to think of on another level of like, it's not black and white of what reform can be done or what treatment of whatever, and so it's like there are just so many layers to everything.
So since we last talked, it's been a week, and I've done some thinking about our conversation on pedophilia, and I did a little bit of research as well as listened to a couple of podcasts, and I kind of want to clarify a few of my thoughts, because I do have more understanding for Hans' point of view and just how he thinks there are alternatives that could be done. So I want to clarify that I don't think all pedophiles should just be killed, because a pedophile doesn't mean you've sexually abused a child. A lot of people live with that and don't act on it.
Is it considered almost like a sexual orientation? Like it's
Some people fight for that. So there has been research done that in utero, some of these people have developed it and they're born with it and they cannot just get rid of it. It's like, how you would say a sexual orientation.
Okay.
A lot of people have pedophilia on top of sexual attraction to adults. And then there are people who are only into children. And so there's a lot of different variations, as there are with many things. But a lot of people don't act on these urges because they know it's wrong. So I guess where I fall is the people that act on it who do not think it's wrong are the ones that I don't think there is any help for. And there's a lot of research put into that.
Yes.
There is a lot that can be done for people who know it's wrong and want help, but they are actively seeking it. You can't just say, you're a pedophile, I'm going to help you.
Right.
These people have to seek it out. So I've been listening to Hunting Warhead, which is a fantastic podcast. It is a lot of hard things to hear, but it's very, very good. And they talk a little bit about that and just the different points of view on it, and the people who are willing to talk about it so that we can make progress and say, hey, there are people who can be helped, and then there are ones that probably can't. One of the people in the case, he cannot. He doesn't think there's anything wrong with anything he's ever done. And
I feel like we're both
seeing the
kind
other
of
side.
countering our own sides, because it's, I mean, I definitely have moments, whether I'm just casually driving and want someone to die because they're in my way, or
That's healthy.
there are there are cases where you're just like, there's nothing
that can be done.
And so as much as I'm, of course I'm, anti-death penalty and all of that, there are times, that's not to say I disagree with the idea. I mean, you hear these stories and it's that, that person does not get to share our air or joy or life or any of it. So definitely the people that are in those rings and sharing photos and damaging children, and
they've all acted on it.
And they've acted and just waiting to get caught, as opposed to I have to get some sort of help. That would be interesting to kind of explore that, and maybe even like have a conversation with people that work in
the
those
psychologists for sure. I think, I mean, it's an interesting perspective, because we can't just go into everything assuming, oh, because you have these feelings, you're a garbage human, you're going to act on it. Because I read some statistic, it's like 1% of adults have some sort of pedophilic affliction. And that does not mean they're going to act on it. But let me tell you this statistic, I got it off of Hunting Warhead. Over 80% of people in prison for child sex abuse imagery online, having downloaded it or uploaded it, over 80% of them have laid their hands on a child to do it. That's shocking.
Wow.
But now of those people, they're going to fall into, I know it's wrong and I hate myself for doing it. And then there's the other side. It's like, what's wrong with it? This is a healthy feeling. I'm not hurting anyone.
In that case, how would you feel if, so there's someone serving time because they harmed a child or did, circulated images, and if they were asking for help? I'm just curious on your personal feelings of it. Would a rehabilitation be something that?
I think you should always attempt it. My biggest fear is most of these people will reoffend. That is just how it is.
Well, and that's the cycle too. It's like,
right.
What's the percentage of those people that were also abused?
But they should be
that's
getting
going to be incredibly high as well.
Treatment in prison, even if they have a sentence of say 25 years, they should be getting treatment, because they will get parole usually. And then we're releasing them to all it's like a freaking heyday for them.
Yeah, because all you've done is built up their network of who they know and who's in the circles and all of that.
And then there's no preventative measure too, right? So one of these women in this podcast was talking about how she caught this 18-year-old man interacting with her 11-year-old child and cut it off, blocked him, asked him never to contact, went to his boss because he worked with children and said, this isn't right. You need to do something. And they still employed him. And it's like, that is an opportunity to correct and engage somebody to help him. I'm not saying it would have done anything, but you could try, right? We should not try.
Because what's the other option? Okay, so you file a police report and then he gets charged, or, if there's something worth charging, and then he goes to juvie or he goes to jail, and then he comes out and it's like, what has
He's
come
just
from
learned
that?
how to hide it better,
Exactly.
learn new ways to do it.
Whereas there could be an intervention to say, it's almost like if you took funding from the local police enforcement.
Don't even go there. They do talk a little bit about that on that podcast though, so you should check it out. But I just wanted to kind of let you guys know, I don't think everyone's a bad person. You shouldn't judge someone who hasn't acted on something they know is wrong. And I'm trying to think a different way. I do believe there is a large portion of those people that cannot be fixed and should not be anywhere near children.
Absolutely.
And those are the ones I guess I was talking about.
Yeah.
But I just want to say thanks for that conversation.
Well, thanks to Hans.
Yeah, thank you.
And anytime, we love hearing from anybody, if it's a differing opinion or, looking at things a different way. Yeah, just don't call
us a mean name, but please
just
feel free to message us or email us.
Slide in those DMs and be like, hey, what about this? And then we'll have an argument about it.
A healthy argument where hopefully we don't offend each other. But thank you. Thank you very much.
So it's all online.
And they did say 10 days.
And
Yeah,
she
but they
was
might have
like,
had
"We
to
look
cut
forward
their
to
staff."
listening."
That's true.
Oh.
I'll cut their
You know.
staff.
Oh.
Do you want me to cut your staff?
Ew.
Off?
No.
Down the middle like a hot dog?
Your staph infection.
That reminds me of a TikTok video.
Hot dogs?
This girl was just like slicing brats in half and throwing them on the thing and slapping. Like,
what did it
is
say?
happening?
Like bad breakup hashtag.
No, she's just like, I think I must have followed her for recipes or something. I'm like, who is this and what is she doing?
She's a real meat slammer.
Oh my God, it was so violent. Look good though. Look tasty. All right. On November. Called police to tell that she.
Hello? My friend sent me a meme that said every time you yawn in October, a ghost sticks its dick in your mouth.
It's cold, like Edward Cullen.
Mm.
Edward Cullen.
He's got a cold dick?
Yeah, he's made of ice.
Wait.
What?
Who?
He's made of...
Edward Cullen, the vampires are very cold.
Oh, okay.
They're
Made
like
of-
marble. Their
Really?
bodies are marble.
I didn't know that.
Do you
That's
think
disgusting.
she had to get like that heating lube?
They talked about how they'd always have a blanket between them, but when they finally had sex, the coldness didn't come up. Although we all
It
were
does,
thinking
though.
it. We
We've
were all thinking it.
We've all had a cold winter's morning and we grab things that have not adjusted to human
Mhm.
temperature and whew.
Yeah.
Well, she was having sex with the marble statue.
Well, I
Gross.
hope they use that warming
Wow.
lube.
Stephanie Meyer really has some stuff going on in her head, huh? About sex.
Maybe she
and-
likes to masturbate with cold dildos.
Some people do. They take like the glass ones and put it in the fridge.
That sounds awful.
Yeah.
I think I saw that on Real Sex. Okay.
Jam.
So good. Literally. Ice Jam. Sequel to Space Jam. Hockey.
Oh my God, I'm slurring.
A little bit. Are you drunk? You drunk?
Yeah.
Hmm.
First thing I do, Jägermeister in the morning. The Ninth Circuit Court approved. No, yeah, that was right. Fuck. The girl had run for her life and flagged down a truck that was able. Nope.
Unable.
Yep.
Oh. I got one right.
And fragged. But while he was away, the girl ran. Fuck.
Bertha Lush is one of the greatest names I've ever heard in my
Ever.
life.
It is.
Ever.
Were you writing that down?
Yes.
And of course, she's a landlord of a rundown
And
motel.
old.
She
She's
has
old.
no choice. She has no choice in the matter.
In the El Dorado Motel and had. Oh my God. I said I was going to read it. And I think of all the fights we ever had. And one of our most brutal fights was over that song, Hungry Eyes, because I didn't know the lyrics very well. And I thought it was saying something. And she was like really angry about it. I was like, no, it's this. And I'm like, are you sure that doesn't sound. And we got in a fight over that. We were like 8.
It doesn't sound like you at all.
Including various serious offenses that they. What the fuck?
Murder in the Rain is produced and edited by Josh McCullough. Written and hosted by Emily Rowney and Alicia Holland. Artwork by Jamie Costa. Music by Kai Pfeiffer at kyfifer.com. Check out our website, murderintherain.com, for additional information on all cases, a fun interactive map, and be sure to subscribe so you can receive our newsletter. Check out the Mad Props page for coupon codes from some of our sponsors. We love your reviews and seeing them on all streaming platforms, especially iTunes. And check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And suck my balls.
Please put that in.